Ruslan.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. We're going to be talking with my brother, Chris Broussard. We had an amazing conversation last time, and we wanted to go further to do some of your guys' questions. So if you have a question specifically on the topic of reparations, that is what we're here for the next hour. Well, my man, Chris, what's up, brother?
What's up, man? How are you?
Back by popular demand. I'm fantastic, man. We had a lot of positive reactions.
I enjoyed it last time. I enjoyed the conversation, and I felt bad that we didn't get to answer a lot of the questions from the viewers. So we're here to do that today.
I appreciate it, and I think, man, I just appreciate your time. I appreciate you being willing to have the hard conversations. There's some, the conversation caused some outrage and made some people upset. Generally, it was positive, and I just told people like, yo, send in your questions. Send in your questions. Right. We have resources for you guys. There's an article on the Gospel Coalition on the biblical argument for reparations. So those of you guys that are like, oh, it's not scriptural, Chris did an amazing job of laying it out. And we have an article for you that you can go deeper. If you want to get all weird on us and be the anti-racist and say the Gospel Coalition and went too woke, that's your prerogative, but it's here. This is a very conservative evangelical website laying out a biblical argument for reparations. So if you have this topic of reparations, this is part 2 of our conversation. Chris did an incredible job laying out a biblical argument. A couple questions. How do you go about pro athletes using their platform for social justice? How do you feel about, we just talking about LeBron and folks like that. What do you think about
Well,
pro athletes
first of all, I wish they didn't have to. I wish they didn't. I think all African Americans, and particularly African American athletes, really wish that black people were in a space where we didn't need our athletes and entertainers to speak up about these things. The white community doesn't need Tom Brady to say a word about any issue of the white community. They don't need, any other white athlete to say anything, Aaron Rodgers, about a political issue facing the white community. But African Americans, just because of our historical situation in this country, we need our athletes to speak up. I believe that black athletes are the most beloved, the most well-connected. They are the wealthiest. I mean, if you look at Forbes' top 10 wealthiest African Americans, not Africans, period, or people of African descent, but black Americans, African Americans, the majority of them made it through either sports or entertainment. Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Jay-Z, Beyonce, Oprah, Robert Johnson, who created BET, like almost all of them, all but probably 2 or 3 made it through sports and entertainment. So they're our wealthiest African Americans. Yeah. And here's the thing, they're the most irreplaceable. Can't replace them. You can't replace LeBron James. You can't replace Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson. To the point where, like, I thought when Colin Kaepernick did what he did, knelt during the national anthem, I thought it was very courageous of him. But I thought it was even more courageous than most people acknowledged. And I say that because at that time, Colin Kaepernick was second string. Colin Kaepernick was expendable. The San Francisco 49ers could have cut him a week or 2 later, and nobody would have made a peep out of it. Well, he's not that good anymore. He fell off. So he was expendable. But think about it. What if Russell Wilson had done that? You think he'd be out of the league right now? What if, I'm just trying to think of superstar athletes. Patrick Mahomes, LeBron James, Damian Lillard, Steph Curry. What if any of them had done exactly what Kaepernick did? I guarantee you they'd still be in the league. And it wouldn't have, like, people would have been upset. Some people would have supported it. Heck, it may have become a trend. But they would not have taken them out of the league because they're so good that they're irreplaceable. And so that gives black athletes a form of leverage that other African Americans don't have. Okay? And so I think that's why they do need to speak out. I think I feel like we as African Americans all have a responsibility to help improve the quality of life and the situation, the plight of African American people. I feel like we all should be trying to help African Americans as a whole get full justice and equality in this country. I say, what if Frederick Douglass had an individualistic mentality and said, you know what, I'm good, I'm free, I'm an ambassador, you know, let the other African Americans get it. I got mine, let them get theirs. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, we could go on and on. Richard Allen, what if they had that attitude where they're not going to say anything about slavery and they're not going to fight to end that injustice? So our African Americans who are in prominent positions, I believe, should speak out on these things, should use their resources to help improve the plight of African American people. And what I really like to see them do, which hasn't happened to the degree that it needs to, but I would like to see African American athletes link up with educators, Black, but also just of any race, educators, economists, accountants, lawyers, civil rights leaders, who can talk to them about how you can use your influence, your connections to help improve the plight of African Americans. LeBron James built a school in Akron largely without his own money. Yeah. He used his ability, his cachet, or if you will, as LeBron James, to get the city to do it, much of it. Other athletes should be doing it. That should be a blueprint for other athletes to follow. And you can set up schools that, you know, could better serve some of our youth. If you're a great athlete and McDonald's or Nike or Louis Vuitton, whoever it may be, wants you to endorse their product, that gives you leverage. well, McDonald's, okay, you want me to endorse your product. What percentage of your franchises are owned by African Americans? Wow, only 4%. Well, we're 13% of the population. I want to put it in my contract that you're going to set up a program and work towards getting your ownership up near 13% within the next 10 years, or stuff like that. Or Nike, you want me to work to endorse your product, and Nike has a good diverse track record of hiring diversity, I believe. But look at that and see, are they doing enough in terms of diversity? We know how much the Black community empowers Nike, you know, through just wearing their stuff and making their stuff fresh. So those are the types of things. That's the leverage that African Americans can use. And I definitely think it's important for them to speak out.
That's good. Let's get into some more of these questions. If you're finding this conversation valuable, give us a thumbs up. That helps a ton. Have reparations occurred in other countries? I think this is a basic yes.
Yeah, I mean,
the Jewish people
Native Americans in this country have gotten some form of reparations.
Yep.
Obviously, Germany,
yes,
with
Jewish
Israel.
People. Yep.
Even the Japanese who were interned in concentration camps got them here in this country. So yeah, it's quite common, actually. It's quite common.
Do you think okay, this is a good question. Do you think what's being proposed here is unique because it is multi-generational? I'll give you a brief example. I'm Armenian. We just had the genocide of 1915 acknowledged by America, like within April. So it was the 105-year anniversary. It was acknowledged, or the 106-year anniversary was acknowledged. This positions them to potentially hold Turkey responsible and potentially a reparation to the Armenian people. Is it unique when it's multi-generation? Because that's a lot of the pushback, obviously, right? So, like, I think what's happened to Armenians, they should be entitled to some type of restitution or something, right? Not that wild of a concept.
Let me ask you this: where's Turkey on this?
Turkey's outraged. There's entire, like, just like there's Holocaust deniers, there's Armenian genocide deniers. So it's wild. So the Armenian genocide is what influenced Hitler to do the Holocaust. So this is 1915. 1.5. It was 1.5 million, I think, Armenians were killed. It was wild stuff, and it was because of Armenia is in between Turkey and Azerbaijan. I was born in Azerbaijan, so we're right in between two hostile nations. We're the only Christian nation in that whole Middle East section, and yeah, it was pretty wild. So now there's like this could position Armenians who there's no one alive from the 1915 genocide, not to my knowledge, that could potentially get reparations. But what makes it controversial is it's multi-generational, meaning that there
aren't people that actually
were alive today. Yeah.
Right, but the thing is, and we talked about this last time, it's the effects. Right? First of all, African Americans never received reparations as they were promised. Right. The 40 acres and a mule coming out of slavery. So there's that, and then we can look at and see where the plight of African Americans, in turn financially particularly, is related to the discrimination of the past. This, whether it was slavery or whether it was all the other forms of discrimination that have taken place in the last 150 years since slavery. So I think that's where it comes in, where I do think it's fair. And it's interesting, like you mentioned, Turkey. Turkey's not trying to hear it. Now, are there many Armenians in Turkey today?
No.
Okay.
It's
and see, that's where I brought up. Yeah, America, which had little to do with it, if it nothing to do with it, is acknowledging it, right?
Yeah.
But Turkey isn't. What I'm saying is African Americans, we're still at the scene of the crime, if you will. So it'd be like Armenians being in Turkey and Turkey acknowledging what they did. Now, some nations have done that. America has done it to a small degree. Obviously, things have changed and gotten better. But it's a lot tougher when you're like condemning yourself. Yeah. For Turkey to do what you just said, the acknowledgement of the genocide, they would be condemning their own nation's actions. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's a big part of the challenge is America will have to, it's easy to admit, it's easy to run an exhibit, do a documentary, do a discussion, all that. But America doesn't want to do the real nuts and bolts things that need to be done to move us past this situation. In my view, we want discussions. Even all the critical race theory, which some of it may be all right, some of it's way off. But like the whole notion that whites just have to be like, I'm a race, like whites are irredeemably racist, right? Right. And you just have to do your best to treat black people white. You'll never get there.
Yes. But you got to do the work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Feel for these pitiful black people that you got to, like, it's ridiculous. Yes. No, we can have closure.
Yeah.
And I'm saying the closure, whites got tangible financial benefits from the slavery and racism of the past. That's how you get the closure. Now, there are other things that would need to be done today so you don't have the discrimination. But for the most part, to get closure, there needs to be financial, tangible financial benefit, restoration for African Americans. Let me give you an example, Ruslan. Yeah. If I came to your house and I stole your car, and then a week later I come back and I'm like, man, my bad, brother. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sorry. I repented. I'm sorry. But I never give you the car back. Now, no matter how nice I treat you over the next several months, years, whatever, there's going to be tension between you and me until I give you your car back.
Yeah, where my car at, bro?
New one or something, right? I can pick you up. Hey, Ruslan, I'll pick you up in your car. I'll pick you up. You need a ride to work. I'll pick you up. You need bus fare here. Here you go. All that might be okay, fine, whatever. Until I give you your car back, or get you a new one, you're going to be looking at me sideways, and
Yeah.
you're not going to trust me. And if it goes on and our families happen to still live next to each other or be together, your descendants are going to look at my descendants and be like, man, you can't trust them. Them people, man, don't trust them. I don't care how nice they are, don't trust them. I'm going to keep it real. That's how a lot of African Americans feel about America. We making the best of it here. We recognize the goodness, the good things that come from here, but there is a tension for the most part, no matter how successful you are as an African American, for the most part, you still feel a tension between you and your country. So that's why that's why you have to give the talk to your black sons and daughters. If the cops ever come, put your hands on the steering wheel, all of that stuff. That's why you have to say, look, in school, they may teach you this or that, but know that you're just as valuable as anybody else. No, like we have to teach that you're going to be slighted. You're going to be offended. They're not going to teach you the truth about certain things in our own country because that tension is always there. And what reparations is saying is give us back the car.
Yeah.
Give us back the car. You ain't got to give me no more bus fare. Nothing. Give me back the car. And then we can, you know what I'm saying? That's what it is.
Yeah. Let me throw this question up. And I think this is an important distinction because, again, it always reverts back to it being personal, right? So does reparations for African Americans mean that Caucasian people are guilty of the atrocities brought against African Americans? I think it just shows good faith in repairing race ties. So I think, again, we talked about this last time. We're talking about an institution that benefited, corporations that benefited. We're not talking about individual white people passing a hat around and saying, well, let's just pitch in and give it to individual black people. We're talking about institutions that need to make corrections, and specifically Fortune 500 companies that are around right now, banks around right now. So I think that's where, and again, there's an article pinned up, Gospel Coalition on Reparations. This is one of the most misunderstood concepts, is it goes back to, well, why should white people and Mexican people and these people have to pay for this? It's like, that's not what we're talking about. That's not what's being proposed. We're not talking about, hey, let's all these non-descendants of slaves pay for this. We're talking about institutions or corporations. I don't know if you want to expand on that, but I think that, and so this question, and go deeper on this question of like, do Caucasian people are guilty? Because that's a lot of this, like, white people just feel, they don't want to feel guilty, they don't want to feel ashamed, and I don't understand, because I don't get that. I don't gather that from the conversation. It's not about white guilt. It's not about white shame, right? So go ahead. I'm sorry, that was a long question.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it. It's not about making individual whites feel guilty or ashamed or anything like that. And as you said, a lot of it would be the private sector, corporations, banks, universities that have admittedly benefited from slavery. Sharing, giving, we're not even asking you to give 50% of your profits or anything, but a certain percentage or put together programs or whatever it may be to make amends for the past. And it's interesting. Southern, is it called Southwestern Theological Seminary, where
I think it's
Albert
Southwest.
Mohler is the president? Albert Mohler, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, it might be. But he's talked about, they put out this big paper where they studied the history of the racism at their seminary.
Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, yeah.
Is it called Southwestern?
Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in
Southern
Louisville,
Baptist
Kentucky.
Theological Seminary. Albert Mohler, the president. So they put out a big report a few years ago, discovering and acknowledging all of this racism that had taken place through their seminary, the founders of their seminary, and all of that stuff. And then it was proposed to them that you give a certain financial percentage or a financial amount to a black seminary, if I remember correctly. Yes, a black seminary, I believe, in Louisville. And no. I mean, we don't want to go that far. We just acknowledge that we were wrong and we say we're sorry. But we're not about to give any financial, even though we acknowledge that we benefited financially. And we got this great seminary with all these facilities and all this wealth that we admit was built, at least in part, on racism and slavery, but we're not going to give you any, any of that, even though your ancestors may have built their hard work on the plantations, built this seminary, and built the wealth of the men who donated to the founding of this seminary. We're not going to give any of that to you. That's what the car. I'm sorry, Ruslan, I stole your car. I ain't giving it back. But I'm sorry I stole it. Let's just be cool. And then when you bring up, man, look, I want my car back.
Yeah.
And I come to you like, why are you being divisive, brother? Didn't I just cook you up yesterday?
Right.
I mean, and it was all good. You didn't say anything about this. You sitting there steaming, or you learn how to deal with it, and because I got the power, so you got to go along to get along. Okay, I ain't gonna say nothing because he, I work for him or whatever. You know what I mean? But that's what we're at. That's a very simplistic model, but it can get to the heart of the matter for people. And so it's not at all about white guilt. It's about fairness. It's about justice. And as Christians, what are we supposed to do? Hunger and thirst for righteousness. This is about righteousness. And also, and I said this last time, it's about closure, man. Every 20 years or so, this comes up. The 60s, you had the Black Power movement. The late 80s, early 90s, the Rodney King riots, and that stemmed something else. And then today, every generation of African Americans, when they come of age and they start really looking at the situation through adult eyes, they get upset. And they say, we want justice to finally be served. And if we don't do it now, it's going to come up again in the future. It's going to come up again after that. And so I'm just saying, this is one way. There are other things that would need to be done, but this is one way to really get some closure. And if I may use one more example with you, Ruslan.
Sure.
Let's say that you come to my house and you overpower us and you force us to live in the basement. And you're in my house. You come and live in my house and you take over my house. You force us to live in the basement and work for you. And the work that we do, you take it and you become incredibly wealthy. Right? And then after 10, 15 years, you come to us in the basement and say, you know what? I'm going to let y'all come up out of the basement. And now the house is huge. You've expanded it. It's really big because you're wealthy. And you let us live in a couple of rooms in the house. Now you live in really lavish but you allow us to live in a couple rooms, and it's much better than the basement. We're no longer stuck in the basement. So initially, we just happy to be out of the basement. You know what I'm saying? Like, we just like, man, we out of the basement. This is great. But as time goes on, we begin to see, look at how Ruslan's living. Man, he got all that wealth, and he still doesn't share any of it with us. We just got these couple little rooms that we can live in, but we're not eating like him. He's got all this stuff, and we built it. He got all that off our labor. And as time goes on, eventually, we're not just satisfied anymore with being out of the basement. Now, as we get our full dignity back and everything, because now we're out of the basement longer, we're saying, hold on, Ruslan, why don't you, you made all this wealth from us. Why don't you give some of it to us? Why don't you allow us? We're kind of cramped in this room now. And you come back, you could be in the basement still. You need to be happy that you ain't in the basement.
Right.
Well, hold on, but you got all this from us.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? And that's where every generation of African Americans that gets more and more comfortable in America, they get a little bit more freedom. They get a little more, I deserve this. I'm an American too. We want more because because the injustice has not been settled. And so that's another example that I think can help people see and understand what's going on. And then, and if I come to you and when I ask you for to give us some of all this wealth you built off our backs, And you say, well, you're being divisive. You're dividing our little family. You know, it's all good. Well, you thought it was all good.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't hear our conversations in the little room you let us live in where we like, yo, man, look at dude. Look how he living. And you think it's all good because we're just keeping the peace.
Mm-hmm.
But it really never was all good.
Yeah.
And that's the situation in America. White saying you're dividing the country. Really? The country been divided. And we just have kept the peace. But now we're not dividing the country. We're just bringing up the injustice.
Mm-hmm. This is an interesting question. So do you think any amount of reparations or any solution will be enough? A follow-up question to that is like, do you think this is going to cause, if there were reparations, do you think it's going to cause more tension or less tension between whites and blacks?
Well, I would hope obviously it would create less.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, when you say, is there enough? Remember, we talked about this last time. It's not about equality of outcomes. So I don't know if you say enough, does that mean every problem in the African-American community is going to be solved? No. But what I'm saying, if the experts can come to an agreed upon amount, or, you know what I mean? What's fair, what's right, then that's it. Now, again, there do have to be things done in modern day. And I'm not talking about necessarily just one big check to every African-American family or anything like that.
Yeah, that's another misrepresentations. Yeah.
But I do, it's possible that some whites would get angry and resentful.
Yeah.
And hopefully we could move past that, or that wouldn't be the case. But you know what? There's a lot of resentful people right now of various races. A lot of blacks are resentful. A lot of whites are resentful, even so, you know, regardless. So
I think, Chris, I think something that frustrates me, and I see this all the time, is this jab at like a victim mentality. This victim mentality, like, and what I'm like, the truth is that in your situation, you and your family are gonna be fine, right? You have enough. In my situation, regardless of what happened in Armenia with the 1915 genocide, me and my family are gonna be fine. Exposing in historical injustices that have displaced people, hurt people, created vast amounts of disparity to people has nothing to do with a victim mentality. It has to do with what historically happened. Right. Because if it was about a victim mentality, we wouldn't be here earning multiple six figures, running nonprofits. If this was about a victim mentality, and that is just such a shallow, nonsensical argument. Like, well, you just want to be a victim. Like, no. I told you, me and you probably disagree on this. Like, I don't expect the Turkish government to do anything about the Armenian genocide. I don't expect the American government to do anything about what happened here. I have very little faith in institutions and governments. What we're talking about is this right, and how could this look? I think that the part that frustrates me is just people go back to this like victim mentality. Like, I've known you long enough. Like, by the way, no one I've had on my channel has a victim mentality. Everybody's highly successful, entrepreneurial, doing well for themselves and their family. We're talking about how does this work on a social country level where there's these wild disparities because of historical stuff, and then people having to stay here and live here, like the natives having to stay here, black people having to stay here. It's a very interesting thing that we don't really see happening in other places. But go ahead.
Well, to your point, when the Jews talk about the Holocaust, do we ever hear that they have a victim mentality?
Right.
When movies like Schindler's List are made, or whatever it may be, commemorating the Holocaust, I don't hear people say the Jews have a victim mentality. And so I think it's just an excuse. Now, and I do think for African Americans, it is important not to have a victim mentality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the fact of the matter is people are victimized. Mm-hmm. There are victims in life, you know, and acknowledging that doesn't, like, that's right. You should acknowledge if a woman's been raped and she acknowledges it and is like, I want to be repaired, I want this to be fixed, you got a victim mentality. She was victimized.
Yeah.
So the thing is, victimhood is not a destination. Victimhood may be a stop on your journey, but it can't become a destination. So there are, if any African Americans do have a victim mentality, and some do, it has to be eradicated. I know that's one of the challenges. Like I have two daughters, they're 23 years old now. And when they were coming up and I wanted to teach them, I felt it was important to teach them Black history and the history of this country and just various things to do with race. I always was careful because I was like, I want to teach them this, but I don't want them growing up with a victim mentality. I don't want them growing up thinking because I'm Black, I can't be the smartest person in my class of white people or whatever it may be. I can't be just as smart or smarter than my white classmates. So it's important like that we not make victimhood a destination, but it's also important to acknowledge it and let's deal with it. And the fact of the matter is this: if we don't get reparations, if mass changes aren't given to the Black community or done for the Black community, then we do have to just do what we got to do to improve our quality of life. And obviously we have the Lord, those of us who are believers.
Amen.
And I have a very optimistic outlook because I follow the Lord. And we as African Americans, it's like we have to fight the system on one hand, but we also have to do, at the same time, we have to do what we have to do among ourselves. You know, it's like in sports, your coach says, control what we can control. Okay, we can study what the opponent's gonna do. We can study their tendencies and this and that. But at the end of the day, so we need to know that and we need to be prepared for what they're going to do. But at the end of the day, we have to control what we can control and make sure we're at our best. So today, when we talk about when African Americans are being outspoken about police brutality and white supremacy and all of these other things, trying to rid our culture, our society of white supremacy, that's all well and good, and we should be doing that. Yeah. But I'm saying at the same time, we also need to, we can't lose sight of the issues in our own community.
Yes.
So we need to speak out against police brutality and police killings of unarmed Blacks, but we also need to work on black killings.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and
not
I know
either
there's
or.
white on white crime too, but it's the number. It's a lot more homicides in our community. We need to deal with that too. So we need to deal with our own issues as well. Yeah, and we can go a little longer if you want. I got a hard stop at 3:50.
Okay.
Eastern.
I got to do the math. I'm on the I'm on the
right, 12:50.
12:50. Okay, 12:50. Gotcha. Okay. So okay. And by the way, guys, Chris is doing that through kingmovement.com. Like that's literally so to be like, no. There's an actual nonprofit he's running that we can help, that he is doing, getting stuff off the ground, and doing the exact work that he's talking about. So it's not an either or, it's an and both.
Right.
Yeah.
And one thing I hate is that when you look at television, and people talk about the Black plight, right? You get either extreme. You have Blacks on television who all they do is rail against the system. And it's racism, and it's racism, and it's racism, and that's the problem. And never talk about what we need to do and what we need as Blacks need to take responsibility for. And then you've got those on the other side, the quote unquote conservatives, who all they do is rail against Black. Well, if we just pull up our pants, then we, and studied and stopped playing basketball, then we'd be, no, it's both. Yes, we need to take responsibility for certain things, but we also need to recognize, acknowledge, and fix the elements of the system that have worked against us and are working against us.
Yeah, that's good. This is an interesting question. Would being given land today in the middle of the country be an acceptable form of reparation? Asking because there's plenty of unused land in the middle of the country right now. Interesting question.
Yeah, I think that's very challenging because, okay, he mentioned there's a lot of unused land, but that's like starting from scratch, to have people. Now, would America obviously all African Americans would not move to this land. That's really not what I'm asking. I don't know if there are African Americans asking for that. The Nation of Islam, that was their initial plan back when they started, was that they still have it on their papers with Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan. They wanted America to give Black Americans some land to farm and build up and become a separate nation. I don't think that's realistic. Obviously, most African Americans would not move to that land, and so I don't think that's a realistic situation.
Okay, interesting. Let's keep going.
I mean, let me say, I guess you could give maybe some certain black businessmen or blacks some land like they did the Homestead Act and allow them to build it up. But if he's talking about blacks settling in the middle of the country in mass and starting their own country with the aid of America, I don't think that's realistic. But yeah, if you were going to, like the Homestead Act, give certain plots of land to African Americans that they could do with what they wanted, right?
Yeah.
Then that is perhaps something that's realistic and would be beneficial. So
yeah,
I mean, misunderstood the way it was.
Yeah, I mean, even stuff like in San Diego, Chris, this is one of the most expensive places to live. But in San Diego, there's a program that's a down payment program where if you put down 3%, the county will match the other 17% to help you get into a mortgage. So for someone that's trying to get into a $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 home, they don't want to be displaced and move to another part of the country. They have roots here. Even a program like that, by the way,
Right.
which there's stuff like that happening here in San Diego. It's just very limited, and it's very difficult to get into a program where the county will help you get into a house. But even a program like that where you're saying, hey, there's these grants available for people to get in a home. Why? Because homes are the number one way most people build wealth and pass down properties over time, right? So I think even something like that could be really, really helpful. Access to loans, access to capital, small business loans, right? Everybody just thinks like people just want to send $14 trillion to black people. Like that's
what Bob Johnson said, the founder of BET. Yeah. Well, so I think what they're looking at, and we talked about is the bailouts. 2008 and then in 2020, where government came up with all these trillions of dollars when they needed it, and that's what some were saying. But and their African Americans disagree. Some feel like it would be better in programs and various things like that, and maybe some type of cash. Others, like I said, Bob Johnson and others who studied it. William Darity, who really he's a professor at Duke. He's written books on reparations. He feels like it should be cash.
It's interesting.
And
So someone's asked, do you think a one-time financial reparation would fix any current issues facing blacks, or could they be invested in programs not run by the government to better help? That's an interesting question. A one-time financial reparation, right? Because that's where we get into the weeds. We're talking about financial reparation. We're talking about programs. We're talking about grants. We're talking about mortgages. Like, what are we ultimately talking about? Do you think a one-time fee would fix anything?
I do think it would, because it would allow African Americans who need just some financial relief. Martin Luther King, and I think we broached this last time, or I may have been talking on another podcast talking about it. But toward the end, everybody likes to, especially white conservatives, like to quote the "I have a dream" speech, right? Let's judge everybody by the content of their character and so on and so forth. But if you look at Dr. King later in his life, the last few years of his life, he was really talking about economic empowerment. He basically was like, look, and that's why people accused him of being communist. He wasn't communist, but he was just saying, we do need to do something economically for African Americans, or this thing will never change. And he went up north. He went to Chicago. He went into the inner cities of the north and saw the slums and the decrepit situations that African Americans were living in. And he was like, man, in the South, it was a little more cut and dry, right? It was segregation. Blacks couldn't go here. He saw in the North, he was like, it's a lot more complicated, because they aren't necessarily officially living in segregation up north, even though, you had masses of blacks in certain areas. But they haven't been given any type of economic sustenance to live with, to really compete in this society. And so he even talked about, there's a famous line where he says, when we march this time, we going to Washington to say, cut the check. And he went over the Homestead Act and all of the things that whites had been given to give them a boost economically and set them up. And he was like, we want that for African Americans. It's interesting. You don't hear that type of Dr. King stuff talked about. A lot of people feel like that's more why he got shot and killed than just saying, let's end segregation. And so a one-time financial situation, it would help many African Americans who are, just struggling and scrambling. And so, yes, it will help. Look, would some waste it perhaps? I think any race, if you give to, some may waste it. And that's always, kind of running joke, like some are going to waste it and go out and buy all these material things. I mentioned Dr. William Darity. His point is, well, that's their prerogative. If the fact is what's fair, give this to them. And if they go and waste it, one, it's their prerogative. Two, shame on them, right? Because we gave you a shot and you chose to waste it. Now, what I think, there are current forms of discrimination that would need to change as well, right? Like, I think the textbooks, I think we need to teach true American history, not in a way that has to shame white people, but we do need to teach the truth about American history. We do need to have a more diverse curriculum, even especially perhaps in our seminaries. Because if you go to seminary, Ruslan, Christian seminary, because I've been in classes where if they're going to teach you the history of the Christian church, right? They're not teaching you the history of the Christian church. They're teaching you the history of the European Christian church. And they go from the Roman Catholic Church to the Protestant Reformation, as if that's the entire history of the Christian church.
Right.
Armenia, as you know, was either Armenia or Ethiopia was the first nation to officially make Christianity their state religion. Right. Ethiopia, they're not going to teach you about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Nubian Church, the Egyptian Coptic Church, the Indian Orthodox Church, the church in Persia or the Middle East. They're not going to teach you any of that. And that stuff, so a lot of African Americans have a barrier to Christianity because they feel it's the white man's religion. But in a lot of ways, it's been pushed as the white man's religion and promoted as the white man's religion. Right. And so that stuff needs to change. The way we present all the people in the Bible and the angels, and everything is white. A lot of modern stuff needs to change. We talked about the schools, the public schools, of making it fair, where the rich suburbs don't have more money spent on their education than the inner cities and the hoods, rural areas, inner cities. So there are other things that would need to change. Yeah. But there's no doubt that a financial boost to African Americans would help dramatically. And again, if some wasted it and just went out and bought a lot of material things, then shame on them. And if you're white and you're like, white companies, they would reap the benefits of that. If a bunch of blacks went out and bought, Cadillacs and the stereotypes, followed those stereotypes and bought all this stuff.
Talk about an economic stimulus.
So hopefully that wouldn't be the case, and it would be used more judiciously. But the bottom line is, people can spend money however they want.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation, big picture, right? Because you talk about there's this tension between human behavior, right? If humans have their basic needs met, right? Which somebody did the math and they said 14 trillion to each person sent out is like 500,000, right? Per person.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I thought you meant 14 trillion each person. I was like, wait.
No. So let's just go down the logical conclusion of there is a 500,000 for every black descendant of slaves here today. That's $500,000. And let's just say now everyone's food and shelter is met indefinitely, right? Then the question becomes, and this is a deeper conversation of human behavior, incentive, these different things. I haven't done enough study to say, hey, the person that has their basic needs met, food, shelter, clothes, community, what does that person do, right? How does that person do? Does that person just kick their feet up and play video games all day? Or does that person go build a business to help other people, right? I don't know. I know in my case, the more stable my life has gotten because of working jobs that earn more money, that then position me to develop more skills, to then launch a business, to earn more money, to then launch other businesses, to hire employees, to do less work. The more stable my life has gotten, the more stable my marriage has gotten, the more stable my family's gotten. Me, and maybe I'm an outlier in this, has only empowered me to do more, build more, and help more people. Right? And so I don't know, I haven't looked enough in terms of like the human behavior aspect to say, does this actually, how does this affect, right? I know there's a proverb that says an inheritance attained too early in life is not a blessing in the end, right? Which if you look at lottery winners, there are some lottery winners, a lot of them that just completely blow it, right? They completely squander money. So it's an interesting,
even we saw, what was the video a week or two ago, of Kodak Black, was it?
Yeah.
Throwing $100,000 into the water. Like, I was so upset with that. That's ridiculous. But I think it's fun. It's interesting because the founders of this country have said that this country, because it's a democracy, the Declaration of Independence, all of that stuff, they've said this will only work if you have a God-fearing populace. Right? Because if you have democracy where everyone, so at least in theory, has a say, then if most people have an ungodly mindset, it can lead to chaos. But that's true of any form of government. You know, even if you have just whatever it may be, people, because of their sin, will take advantage of it. Yeah. So I agree with you. Look, if I had, one of my motivations for getting more money is to be freed up to really do and say whatever the heck I want. You know what I'm saying? It's that FU money. And I don't mean in an individual selfish way. I mean to help people, to really speak out against certain things, that we see going on and not have to worry about my water being cut off. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. And so I'm with you. I would want to use that to really be able to build up things and help things. And we've seen historically a lot of people have done that. But I think people of every race, there are going to be some that just want to live large and waste it.
Let me ask you this. This is where my brain goes. And so I'm not, my heart is not to come off like patronizing or anything like that, but this is where my heart goes. If there's folks in the chat, and some of them are asking really silly questions, others that have legitimate questions. If there is, if we start with just an acknowledgement, and we say, Chris, I hear you, man, you're right. Black people have been mistreated. It's not just about slavery. There's been terrible things done in the last 150 years by Democrats and Republicans, by all people of the political aisle. Yes, we know the crime bill of 1994 that Joe Biden signed. Yes, we know the war on drugs. There's black clergy involved. Yes, we know that. And then we also know that Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon were on tape using wild language about black people, and they also helped write the war on drugs. And we just say, you know what, man? Chris, I hear you. I feel you. I think black people are entitled to some type of reparation. Something should be done at some point. This should happen. Do you think just that acknowledgement alone, will ease some of the tensions that we're facing? Because everybody wants to get into the weeds on the how. How do we do this? Does that mean white people got to take money out of their savings account to send over to black people? There's other, all these whataboutisms and all these hows, right? But if we just start with just that basic acknowledgement, and say, you know what, there have been historical atrocities done, and it's not, because I'll tell you what, and I'm not trying to speak on behalf of Armenian people, but a lot of Armenian people really just want the genocide to be acknowledged, and none of us are holding our breath for a reparation from Turkey. We know what energy they're on. This, like just acknowledge that this happened, and I'm not holding my breath for that. And that's more or less the sentiment. What frustrates Armenians and Jewish people and black peoples is when there's a denial of history. When you start denying the Holocaust, Armenians get really frustrated when you start denying the Armenian genocide. You just, it's just war. It's just what happens at war. Bad stuff happens, right? Or in America. Oh, what about all the other countries that did terrible things? There's slaves in other countries. Conquer and divide. When natives, they should have had better guns when they got here. Right? It's like this very manifest destiny type of thing. So it's like, do you think if everyone here, white people, black people, Mexican people, Asian people, just say, you know what, Chris, you're right. That's freaking foul. That's jacked up. It's impacted people multi-generationally, and that sucks. I don't know how, but yeah, I'm going to just start with an acknowledgement. Do you think that would ease? And then we can go into schools. Okay, well, here's the disparity. Public school funding, we pay for that.
Right.
That should be fair. Hey, police officers, by the way, we paid for them. You work for us. Hey, maybe you shouldn't mistreat black people and be combative with poor people and people who have mental issues. So I'm not sure. Hopefully that question is coming across.
Yeah.
Right? But like, do you think just an acknowledgement? Because I feel like there isn't an acknowledgement, and that's what infuriates tempers, and then people get frustrated, and you got one side like, oh, you're just a victim, you're making it up, blah, 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 right? And then you have other like, where else would you rather live? America's great, American exceptionalism. And then you have black people saying like, you're not even willing to hear us, like you're not even listening. You're coming back with answers and rebuttals before you even listen.
I do think that in individual or even group conversations, maybe a church conversation. Let's say you have an interracial church, right? And they had this type of discussion, and the whites did acknowledge what you just said.
Yeah.
I do think that would help.
Okay.
I think that we as believers have got to be willing to have honest, transparent discussions about this issue, about race. And we have to give each other the grace to offend us.
Yes.
Not purposely necessarily, but just you may say something like, for instance, if we're having that type of discussion, 100 interracial, groups of various Christian races of people having a discussion at a church, and I bring up, that America's history of mistreatment. And it claimed to be a Christian country, but obviously the way it treated blacks was not Christian and blah, blah, blah. Whites have to be willing. I mean, that's just the truth, but they have to be willing to be offended. I know that offends all the history you've been taught that America's, so great and manifest destiny, city on the hill, all that. But give me the great, you have to be willing to be offended. Now, if a white brother stands up and says, well, we had a young black man we tried to mentor in the Big Brother, Big Sister program, and we gave him this and we gave him that, and we sent him to this school, and he didn't study, and he just wanted to hang out with his boys back in his old neighborhood. He ended up getting in trouble and going to jail. What can we do about that? Or, there's so many blacks having children out of wedlock. Like, we need to be willing to listen to that. And if that offends us, give you the grace where we'll listen. Now, we're going to continue the discussion, right? But we need to give each other the grace. We can't be so offended that once you say that, I'm like, see, you just racist. See, that's what I'm talking about. I'm out of here. Or you get mad. Well, no, America is great. And, it is a Christian nation. And that's one thing. So we have to be willing to have these discussions. Now, on a national level, I don't think an acknowledgement is enough. There was an apology, in the early 2000s for slavery, a national apology. Obviously, the Democrats on the left side, they're acknowledging that something needs to be done. That's one of the things that, I've always felt blacks deserved reparations. But up until a few years ago, I never thought it was worth wasting my energy on because I didn't think it would happen. But then you see so many people that ran for the Democratic nomination talking about reparations. And then when George Floyd happened, I saw a lot of white elected officials like equating or connecting the George Floyd situation and the police brutality to the discrimination of the past. And that's what maybe, okay, so now they're seeing the connection. So now maybe something can be done. So Democrats, I think, are acknowledging it, right? The Republicans, for them to just acknowledge it, they would not be trusted. When Trump came out with the Platinum Plan, right? Most African Americans were like, even though he talked about $500 billion, most African Americans didn't trust it, didn't want to hear it. And one of the reasons, because I talked to some of them about it, one of the reasons was because there was no plan, no real in-depth plan. Okay, where's this $500 billion going to go? How is it going to be dispersed? So I think along with the acknowledgement, particularly if it came from the right, there will have to be some form. I know, like you said, it's a complex situation. So it's not like you got to have everything, written out and everything necessarily solved.
Yeah.
But some form of a plan where this would happen. And let me say this, because part of my reason, I've talked about, I think reparations could bring closure. It's one of the things that could bring closure to the racial dilemma. It's fair. It's just and fair. And then thirdly, it could be evangelistic. Because can you imagine if, let's say, I'm just going to throw out Mike Huckabee and some of the people with him, Mike Huckabee came out and Rand Paul and came out and said, look, African Americans deserve reparations. We look at the past, and they laid out the plan of why. And now he still stands for traditional marriage, and they still stand for, pro-life and all of those things and capitalism and all of that stuff. But he said, look, along with these quote unquote traditional values, we are promoting justice and reparation or repair, some form of restitution for the crimes and atrocities of the past that have created the current situation. And here's a cursory plan of how we're going to do it. If Huckabee, who's known as a Christian, because I'm saying if the church came out and did this, I think that would be an incredible witness. And African Americans are among, even though most vote Democrat, are among the most socially conservative people in the country because of the religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam. And they would latch on to a lot of those conservative values that they agree with anyway, if there was more talk about justice and inclusivity in accompanying the talk about traditional conservative, socially conservative values.
And we're okay with talking about justice, or the vast majority of evangelicals or Christians are agree on, like, hey, the unborn, that's a justice issue. That should be changed. We got to figure out to limit that. We got to figure out a way to reduce that. We got to figure out a way to limit the legalities of that. So we would agree on that. That's impacting people in a negative way. And that is a justice issue. And you brought that up earlier. Here's an interesting question. I think this relates to you. I live in Jersey City, where instead of making the community better and giving black people reparations, they are raising the cost of living and inflation. How can we change that? So you're near Jersey, right?
I'm not far from Jersey City. That sounds like that could be gentrification.
Yeah. And is there anything to help with that? I mean, again, I'm going to point people back to home ownership, financial literacy, and say, hey, let's buy up our own blocks. Let's buy up our own neighborhoods. Because I got friends who have been displaced from LA and who've been displaced from parts of Brooklyn. And then I also got black friends who own multiple brownstones in Brooklyn that aren't multimillionaires. They were bus drivers and electricians, and they got into real estate earlier on in the process, right?
Right.
I think it's getting harder and harder in the metropolitan areas. Like, it's very difficult to buy a brownstone in Brooklyn now, right? Or buy a place in LA now. But how do you navigate that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complex issue. Like I said, that looks like, I don't know exactly, but it looks like that's gentrification. I think what you said, as far as buying up property, that you can, but some of this stuff is getting so expensive that a lot of people can't do it. But there's a plan there, like you said, it's displacing people, and the property value of those areas, if they gentrify them, is going to skyrocket, and people not from the community are going to come in and get wealthy from it. So that's a complex situation, but what's being done, that is not the answer to, at least if we're trying to bring about racial justice.
And my thing is, like, why would you not want folks who were in neighborhoods for decades to be able to get into a home that, that maybe they've been renting for a while? Like, why would, right, if we're talking about racial, like, why would that be a bad idea? Like, I've been to Brooklyn, a lot of these parts are gentrified now, and I remember watching, like, dudes that, you know, were black dudes there multi-generationally coming out of the projects, and then like white soccer moms like walking their stroller, right? And I was like, man, this is such a cool, like interesting dichotomy, but why would you not want folks to have access to home ownership and maybe channeling some of the resource to help people in those areas stay in those areas? Same thing in Los Angeles, same thing in San Diego. There's multiple generations. Out here in Cali, everybody's getting displaced to the high desert. So there's a lot of folks that in San Diego, Los Angeles, they're having to go further and further inland. That's the part where I'm like, why would you want people displaced? Like, it doesn't make sense to me from just a culture standpoint, right? Like there's culture in having diversity in neighborhoods. That's never like, why would you want Harlem to all of a sudden become an all-white area? Like, there's rich history in Harlem. Why would you not want people to stay in Harlem and help them get into properties and help them build?
There are a lot of whites in Harlem now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's a Whole Foods in Harlem now.
It's so different from what it was like just 3 years ago.
Right.
You know,
right.
But I think, look, there are those that work like for the cities, various cities, you know, with the government, and they really work hands-on with a lot of this stuff, and a lot of them will tell you it's just straight up racism. You know, this is everything isn't, oh, everybody wants to fix this. Some are just, they don't like blacks or other people of color or whatever it may be, and don't want them, they just don't like them or don't want to live with them, don't want to live around them, or they have stereotypical thinking about blacks. So I think there's some of that. I don't know. I wonder, I don't know if this is the case with some whites, but I wonder too, do some whites worry that blacks would want revenge? You know, like if blacks ever got any power where they could perhaps put revenge on whites, would they want that? Blacks don't want that. I mean, I've dealt with some of the most militant, Afrocentric, black nationalist cats, and nobody's looking for revenge that I've talked to, and I'm not talking about just Christians, but they're just looking for sustenance and to, you know, improve our quality of life. But I do wonder if some whites feel that way and worry about that. And I think too, Ruslan, whites have been so used in America, even if they aren't consciously looking for it or trying to have this be the situation, whites are used to being in power, and in the majority when it comes to positions of power. I remember early in my career, if I walk into a sports box, a press box at a game, and there were 50 reporters in there and 5 of them were black, some whites felt like, man, blacks taking over there. And it's 5 out of 50. But it's not really taking over. It's just more than a decade ago, it was 1. And 2 decades ago, it was none. And so I think whites are used to being in the positions of power. So when equality is actually present, it may feel to some whites like I've lost out. I'm not, because you're used to being in that higher, superior position, if you will.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You know.
So last question, I want you to paint the picture from your perspective when people make these statements of like, just make better choices and be responsible, right? And you've been to some of these neighborhoods. I've been to the south side of Chicago. I've been to the Bronx. I've been to some of these places, Camden, New Jersey, Brooklyn before the Barclay was in that, was in Park Slope. Like, I've been to these places. I've seen these neighborhoods. I've seen the conditions some of these folks grow up in. I have family members that, you know, were in the foster system. It's very easy to just talk about making good choices, like when you have 3 meals a day cooked for you, right? It's very easy to talk about. So talk about like some of that dichotomy and why what you're talking about is like, hey, we just want a level playing field to go out and get it. We're not saying equal output, and I hate to keep bringing that up. But let's end on that note, because I think there's like everybody thinks that everything is a meritocracy based on their experience. And as someone that's came from a single parent household, my mother wasn't in the picture, I could tell you it's not a pure meritocracy.
No, it's not.
It's people's choices are limited.
Yeah, the only pure merit, and this one isn't 100% pure, but the most pure meritocracy in America is athletics, sports. Because if I put 2 dudes in a boxing ring, we're going to see which one's the best. It's going to be pretty clear.
Yep.
2 dudes on the track, 2 dudes on the football field. It's going to be clear which one's best. And if I want to win and keep my job, I can't worry about the race. I got to pick, this white dude's better. I got to pick him, right? That's just how it is. So that's a meritocracy. Everything else is very much a gray area. But to answer your question, I would just say this, and certainly people, black, white, people of all races can make better decisions. That includes African Americans, no doubt. But look at how many, whether it's a politician, whether it's an athlete, whether it's an actor, whether it's a corporate businessman, a corporate titan, we can go to Enron and WorldCom and all these corporate crimes. Look at how many people who have great wealth, great education, great position in society, look how susceptible they are to moral failings. Whether it be sexually, whether it be criminally, stealing, financially, whatever. Look at how many people that have everything or have a lot. Look at how susceptible they are to moral failings. How many politicians, Republican as well as Democrat, that we've seen fall susceptible to moral failings. Now, how much more susceptible is a person when they have none of that?
Come on.
When they don't have the access to the good education. They don't have food in the refrigerator, for the most part. Yeah. They don't have money. How much more susceptible are they to a moral failure?
Yep.
I've thought about this. Like, if I was really in the hood, I mean really in the hood, like some cats grow up, and I'm a kid and my father's not there or whatever, and I got my boys, they live in large, selling drugs or whatever, making money. That's gotta be incredibly tempting. I'm not justifying it by any stretch, but that's incredibly tempting, even if my father is there, right? And so I'm just saying, look, people of all races and classes are susceptible to moral failings. And we should know that as Christians more than anybody.
Yep.
And so how much more susceptible are people that don't have those things? And we got innumerous amounts of evidence about people who have money, power, education, all that. And in this case, there's evidence of blacks too, like that, but a lot of whites. Yeah. And who are doing the wrong thing. Some of these corporate crimes, I wonder, why in the world are you still committing corporate crimes? You're a billionaire. Right. Why are you, So how much more susceptible is the poor person to that? Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's good. And guys, as a final challenge, if this isn't if you genuinely care, and it's not just a whataboutism, what about this, what about that, right? If you genuinely care, go make a donation to these brothers doing good work and helping. Make a donation to Chris's Kingdom, kingmovement.com, pinned up in the chat. Go make a donation. I'm gonna have my brother Pastor Danny on from Park Slope. He has an organization called Youth for Christ. They'll go in and work with youth in these jails to help them turn their lives around. Like, go put your money where if you genuinely care about the black community, you genuinely care about poor people, go do something about it. Because I'm consistently making donations and doing my part to help out to the very best of my ability, and do something about it personally. There are probably people in your life that are missing a father. Go be a father to somebody. Go love on somebody. Go lead somebody. Go take somebody out to lunch. Go pick somebody up to go play basketball. Really be the change you want to see instead of just being critical. We're talking about ideas here, and that will be my advice to you guys, man. Go be the hands and feet of Jesus. And if you want to disagree, that's on you. I'm not mad at anybody that disagrees. I'm mad when people don't listen and aren't willing to extend empathy. That's my trigger. I get irritated because it's unfortunate. So Chris, thank you so much. All
right, my man.
I appreciate you, brother.
Me, man. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, guys. Kingmovement.com. It's pinned up. I'm about to go make my donation. You guys go make a donation. Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate you doing this, man. Peace.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan.
Hey, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you found it valuable, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. You can check out one of the other videos related to this that'll be over here. Now, I gotta tell you about a free training I have for anyone that is an entrepreneur, a creative, an artist, but maybe you are unsure on how to find your voice, how to find your niche. I have a free training in the description of this video. Check it out. Once again, thank you so much for watching.